Still hanging on to Griffith's words, we find Guts and the Hawks engaging the enemy yet again. The second film begins the campaign that will ultimately bring Griffith that much closer to his dream. For 100 years, Midland has been battling the Chuder Empire. In The Egg of the King, we got several glimpses of the Hawks on the battlefield, but the dilemma was more personal. With Count Urius and his son Adonis out of the way, Griffith has one less noble to deal with, and there is now an open spot to the throne. The one thing blocking Midland's victory is the heavily fortified castle of Doldrey, which is occupied by General Boscan and his Purple Rhino Knights. At the start of the film, we see Casca taking on an incredibly deadly, obviously despicable adversary, Adan Korbelwitz. How does the film introduce him? He impales several of the Hawk soldiers, and then asks Casca to be his army whore.
千人長に迎えよう。我がチューダー兵1000人を慰める千人長にな。
We meet this character earlier in the show, and to be honest, watching him in the anime, you'd swear he should belong to a totally different program.
Sir, we were stationed here because the Black Ram Heavy Cavalry were crippled in their last offensive against Midland, sir. Shut up, you cretin!
Aside from his continued failures to defeat the Hawks, he just never shuts up. Adan was designed as comic relief and makes several appearances in the show before ending up on the battlefield where the film introduces him. The film makes him more menacing, thankfully, but he still has one fatal flaw. He keeps running his mouth. Every time he's about to attack, he gives a long-winded speech about how the attack he's about to make was handed down to him as an ancient family secret. If it's so secret, why is he telling everyone about it? Even in the film, it's hard to take him seriously. And yet, given his undeniably loathsome personality, I have to admit, he's a villain you love to hate. Casca is having a surprisingly amount of difficulty fighting him because she's come down with an illness. As Adan is about to deliver a crushing blow, Gut steps in to save the day. He defeats Adan, after sidestepping a drawn-out speech, only to find himself dangling over a cliff, trying to prevent Casca from fainting and falling into the abyss. He almost has her when the over-the-top Adan pierces Guts with an arrow, causing both of them to fall into the river. We get another one of those strange, slow-motion flashbacks, similar to the one Guts had in The Egg of the King, although this one is from Casca's point of view. We find that Guts has dragged Casca to shore and, trying to survive, finds refuge in a nearby cave. He finds her violently shivering and upon inspection discovers she was menstruating. Running out of options, Guts' only chance is to remove her clothes and lay with her, which he knows she'll be totally down for given her reaction when she did the same for him. So here's the deal with Casca. Again, we're delving into the anime arena here. Casca grew up a daughter of poor villagers. When a rich nobleman gave her family a visit, she was actually sold off to him so that her family would have less mouths to feed. Yes, in the world of Berserk, we have many compassionate families, just none for the central characters. And wouldn't you know it, the nobleman's first noble act toward her is to try and rape her in an open field. He tears open her shirt and gets on top of her when a wandering band of mercenaries stumbles upon her.
Do you think somehow you've been chosen by God just because you're a nobleman?
What's interesting is that Griffith doesn't save her. He gives her a choice.
If you have something to protect, then take up the sword.
After accidentally killing the nobleman, Casca realizes she has nowhere to go and decides to join with the Hawks, who at the time are blindly stumbling through the world trying to raise money and secure provisions. This is where Griffith's ambition and devotion to his dream come to light. During a border dispute, the Hawks station themselves at the castle of General Genin, a renowned pedophile who uses young boys as his servants. Wandering the castle grounds at night, Casca stumbles upon Genin's quarters and sees Griffith standing, shirtless, on his balcony.
No, you cannot be serious.
The end result was that Genin gave the Hawks a charitable sum of money, enabling Griffith to grow his army.
Why would you do that with him?
For the money.
Unfortunately, the film sidesteps this aspect completely. There's a hint of a past romance later on, when Griffith and Genin are briefly reunited, but without being given this little history lesson, it just won't make a lick of sense. In the show, once Casca finishes her tale, she says that the main reason she can't stomach Guts is because he keeps putting Griffith's dream on the line. The scene plays out similarly in the film, with Casca none too happy that Guts is lying with her in a cave in the middle of nowhere, but without this backstory, there's not as much weight to the scene. In fact, Casca doesn't seem anywhere near as angry with Guts in the film. She appears to question his motives and compares him to Griffith. It's obvious that she looks at Griffith like he's the Holy Messiah, but deep down, she just wants to be whatever she can be to him, even if it's just as his sword. To Casca, Griffith is still her savior, and she can't accept the fact that it was Guts who came to her rescue. Once they leave the cave, they start to make their way back to the Hawks' camp when they encounter a humorously injured Adon and his 100 troops. This is one of those scenes that exists simply to be badass. Adon taunts Guts, poking fun at his nobility by attempting to rescue a woman. With Casca still weak, Guts tells her to run into the woods to find help while he stands by himself to fight the enemy. And he does. He fights off all 100 men by himself. This is the kind of stuff you hear in legends. What you see in a lot of traditional films is we hear stories of some character that contribute to them achieving status as a legend. Then, later in the film, we find out that the stories were distorted, and the hero in question isn't quite as iconic as we were led to believe. This is the power of anime. We actually witness a legend being born. You saw it here. Guts kills 100 men on his own. He takes a lot of damage, too. This isn't a DC comic book where Batman walks away without even a scratch. He takes a lot of hits, to the point where he can't even use one of his hands. At the start, it appears that he recklessly takes the damage to save Casca, which is true, except he doesn't admit to it. He just tells her that she's in the way. Casca finally takes off, pursued by some of Adon's perverted soldiers, who intend to rape her before killing her. Eventually, the Hawks find Casca, who leads them to Guts' location. They arrive, and the entire battlefield is just strewn with dead bodies. It's literally like a tornado struck the place. Guts is nearly dead, barely able to move, let alone talk. This is the first instance where we see that Casca genuinely cares for Guts. During a war council, all of the generals are seated around a table, crying about their continued losses at the castle of Doldrey. Griffith simply states that if given the order, he and the Hawks will be able to overtake the castle. Of course, the nobles all chime in with their 2 cents, but the king, knowing an opportunity when he sees it, actually gives Griffith the command. Think about it. Even if it isn't the most thought-out plan, if the Hawks lose, it's not like the Midlands would be suffering a huge loss. Compared to some of the more elite armies, the Hawks are relatively minuscule. Again, this is where that whole thing with General Genin would have been useful. Casca reveals to Guts that Genin actually occupies the fortress. This one fact is the driving force behind Griffith's strategy. Griffith knows that Genin has a sick obsession with him, and that he'll stop at nothing to get him back in his bed. He uses this to his advantage when he leads the Hawks into battle. Now, the title of this film is The Battle for Doldrey. Even without the title, there's a sense going in that this is a very important battle.
We have arrived at a crucial moment. Stake your lives on this fight.
If the Midlands can overtake Doldrey, they've pretty much won the war. And if Griffith leads them to victory, he's that much closer to getting his kingdom. What's nice about this is it doesn't spend a lot of time debriefing the characters. We don't get a lengthy scene with Griffith plotting out a strategy. Rather, we simply see the events unfold as they happen. Griffith sends in the first wave of soldiers to attack the castle. Chuder sends out the Purple Rhino Knights, and the Hawks retreat. Genin orders his brutal general, Boss Khan, to bring back Griffith alive, which Boss Khan disputes, rightfully so. Nevertheless, this is where Genin makes his fatal error. He is so obsessed with obtaining Griffith that he, get this, pretty much empties out the fortress. That's right, the entire Chuder army is sent in to try and capture one man. Casca leads her own battalion into the fortress, which is now only being guarded by a small armament of sentries. And guess who's leading them? That's right, old Big Mouth himself. And seeing as how Casca is over her little bout of sickness, he's amazed that she's actually a pretty formidable adversary. In typical cinematic tradition, the film switches back and forth between Casca's troops and what's happening on the battlefield. Boss Khan, against Genin's orders, tries to kill Griffith. Then, Guts and Boss Khan engage in battle. Again, this scene pretty much exists to be badass. Boss Khan is huge, and I'd say he's even more impressive than Zod. In the meantime, it seems that Casca has the upper hand, until... Did she just fall for that? For a woman of her stature, that wasn't too bright. Of course, the good guys can't possibly lose, and Casca plunges Adan's own sword straight into his throat. At around the same time, Guts defeats Boss Khan. And by defeats, I mean he decapitates both Boss Khan and his horse at the same time. This is the one thing the film omits that I actually like. Don't get me wrong, Boss Khan meets the same end in both the show and the film. But in the show, Boss Khan actually breaks Guts' sword. Guts is about to be killed when Zod shows up in the distance and throws Guts his sword, saving his neck. Is it me, or does this sound like a little divine intervention? It's fate that Zod shows up, sure, but I like it better when Guts prevails on his own terms. He wins because of his skill, not because of dumb luck. This scene of the Hawks realizing they've won the war is the most emotionally charged scene in the film, and I'll admit here and now it's probably the only animated film that makes me cry like a little girl. I didn't cry when Bambi's mom died, when Littlefoot's mom died, hell, when Mustafa died. It took the victory of the Hawks to make me realize I'm not a stone-cold bastard after all. The Hawks return to Midland as heroes, parading through the town and being greeted by thankful townspeople. A lot of fans actually wish that the series stopped here, because honestly, this is where the story starts to take a dramatic turn. Since before the Battle of Doldrey, pretty much since that day on the stairs, Guts has been planning on leaving the Hawks in search of finding his own dreams. In the series, Casca picks up on it and actually shows concern.
Guts, you're not thinking of... Are you thinking of leaving the Hawks?
In the film, Guts pretty much just ups and leaves, and the Hawks find him on his way out. This is another big chunk that the film omits. The king holds a spectacular ball, where he thanks the Hawks for leading the kingdom to victory and declares them all nobles. Then Casca and Guts share an awkward dance, and the scene ends there. It's a touching scene showing a very sensitive and beautiful side to Casca, as if this is the girl she could have turned out to be had it not been for an abusive upbringing. It works in a simpler way, but in the next scene we forget it even happened because Guts' decision to leave the Hawks just has so much more weight. Here's what happens in the show. With the nobles completely bewildered that the Hawks have gained noble status, the scheming Minister Foss, along with the Queen, plans to assassinate Griffith by poisoning his drink. At the ball, everything's going just fine when Griffith drinks and is presumed dead. The Queen and her officials celebrate in private when Minister Foss suddenly leaves, locking the door. Within minutes, the room is set on fire. The Queen looks out the window and finds Griffith staring back up at her. Why didn't she just jump out of the window? Sure, she would have broken a leg, but she'd survive. The jump doesn't look to be that far down. Anyway, Griffith paid a bunch of bounty hunters to kidnap Minister Foss's daughter in order to get him to proceed with the deed. Then Griffith has Guts kill the bounty hunters to prevent them from blabbing to anyone else. The other detail the show leaves out is that when Guts initially leaves the Hawks in the middle of the night, Casca and Judo convince Guts to stay first and talk it out with them. Guts tries to explain his reasoning, but ultimately Corcus gets fed up with him and just tells him to get a life.
I don't want what another man can give me. If he grants me anything, then it's his to give and not my own.
Now you sound like a goddamn woman!
Of course, this all leads to the inevitable showdown between Guts and Griffith. Now back to the film, the fight pretty much happens the way it was meant to be. With a single swipe, Guts disarms Griffith but spares his life. Without so much as looking back, Guts leaves the Hawks. The next scene can be pretty much left to interpretation. Princess Charlotte, anxious to see Griffith again, actually gets her wish when he intrudes into her chamber dripping wet. Griffith seduces her, and the two actually have sex. It's an awkward scene because we can't quite tell if Charlotte wants this or not. Either way, she allows it to happen. The other noticeable thing is that while Griffith makes love to her, he envisions Guts. Many fans interpret this as Griffith fantasizing about Guts sexually, and many have even deduced that Griffith has always had sexual feelings for him. If you look back to when they first meet, look at what Griffith says to him. It could just be that Griffith happens to embrace his femininity, and that these visions of Guts are merely his emotions as he engages in sex with the princess. Love mixed with hate and anger. Either way you look at it, it doesn't change the outcome. One of Charlotte's handmaidens catches them through the keyhole. This is where everything goes to hell. When leaving the castle grounds the next morning, Griffith is caught by the castle guard and sent to the dungeons. The Hawks, meeting in a field for an unexplained reason, suddenly find themselves under attack by the Midland Army and are forced to flee. Griffith finds himself at the mercy of the king, who has deemed Griffith and the Hawks traitors.
ただし殺すことは許さん。己が犯した罪の重さを生きながらとくと思い知らせるのだ。タカは地に落ちた。二度と飛び立つことはない。
Griffith makes the startling suggestion that the king wants Charlotte for himself. And I'm not being vague here, he actually suggests that the king wants to have sex with his own daughter. And if you've read the manga, guess what? Griffith knows what he's talking about. After whipping Griffith senseless, the king turns him over to his deformed torturer with a cleft lip, who gets a bizarre pleasure out of playing with his food. And that's how it ends. We do see brief shots of Guts wandering the countryside, but essentially this is where we trail off into the third film. Battle for Doldrey follows the typical structure of the second act in a three-act play. It allows us to further explore the characters and places them in a pretty dire place. What the film does so well is it allures us into a comfortable place where we think they're going to achieve their goals and everything's going to be okay. Hell, after that, who needs a third film? Unfortunately, when Guts leaves the Hawks, he unknowingly changes Griffith, beginning a series of events that only gets darker as the trilogy reaches its conclusion. And boy, what a conclusion it turns out to be.